First of all, can I just check in terms of the fact that what I'd like, if possible, is for the cabinet to keep their microphone and cameras on. So I've got in front of me what I would have normally, i.e. the 9 cabinet members. And that allows me to operate as closely to reality as possible. The other point I'd make is if anybody wants to speak, all they need to do under the latest modification to the Teams app is press the screen, and amongst the instructions that come up will be a hand. And if you press that hand, your name and the hand will come up on my screen. And if you've actually unmuted your camera, your face will come up as well. And obviously you'll have to unmute your microphone if you want to speak. I think that's all I've got to say about the actual use of the system, apart from the fact that when we come to voting on anything, I'll use the same system, i.e. for people to put up their hands. Can I now address my comments to the webcast operator to say that we will start the webcast, and I will start my housekeeping remarks right now. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet. This meeting is being held remotely and members are in attendance via a video conferencing link. The meeting is being live streamed and will also be available for repeated viewing. I'll begin by naming the members who are in attendance for the public record during the meeting. If a member wishes to speak, they will indicate this to me and I will call them to speak in turn. All decisions will be reached by voting, and I will do that via people putting up their hands. So could I ask all those non-cabinet members now to mute their cameras and their microphones, just so that I can check who I've got present from the cabinet themselves. And I note that I've got, I think I've still got Councillor House up at the moment, so I've lost one of the cabinet members. Keith, I think you need to press your camera button.
I'll do that, but I don't think that's the issue. I think it's just that it shows the most recent people.
That's it. Fine. We've got Joy now. Fine. OK, I note that I've got all the cabinet. I'll read your names out just for the record. Myself, Councillor Keith Manns, Councillor Rob Humby, Councillor Ros Chad, Councillor Liz Fairhurst, Councillor Judith Grodowski, Councillor Edward Heron, Councillor Andrew Joy, Councillor Stephen Reid, Councillor Patricia Stallard, and Councillor Sean Woodward. So I think we can move straight on to the apologies for absence. As far as I know, amongst the cabinet members, we've got no apologies, and declarations of interest. I'll take those as read. The normal declarations of interest in terms of disposable pecuniary interest in a matter to be considered under the appropriate paragraph of the County Council's Members' Code. Furthermore, all members with a personal interest in a matter being considered a meeting should consider having regard to Part 5, Paragraph 4 of the Code. Can I now check the minutes of the previous meeting? If you're all in agreement with the minutes of the previous meeting, I'd be grateful if you put your hands up. And I notice there's a majority just waiting for Councillor Woodward to press the button. And that's unanimous. Thank you all very much. We have no deputations today, so we can pass straight on to my announcements, which I will keep pretty brief. First of all, welcome to the first Hampshire County Council Cabinet meeting held online. We're obviously in the middle of one of the most serious crises that we've had in this country for a decade, which is not only affecting us, but many other countries across the world. I would just like to say that Hampshire, the County Council, is working very closely with all our partners to get over this crisis. Our fellow borough and district councils in particular, the two LEPs, the two cities, the Isle of Wight, and our colleagues in the police and the fire service, and of course the NHS. And I'd also like to specially mention all our care homes and all the care workers working either in the care homes or in the community. We must work as one to achieve the objective of reducing the spread of the virus and eventually eradicate it completely. In order to do that, we need to work together, as I've said, and we need to look after each other. So that completes my opening remarks. Let us now turn to item number 6, an early review of the County Council's response to the COVID-19 crisis. And I'd like to hand over to, just before I do that, just got to get my papers sorted. Yes, the early review of the County Council's response to COVID-19, and I'd like to start by inviting Councillor House, followed by Councillor Porter, to make the comments they wish to make at the beginning of this item.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this first meeting, and indeed for your introductory remarks around the crisis that's affecting our country. We very much all are in the same position on this one, and I'd like to put on record on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group our absolute and total thanks to members of staff for all the work they've been doing over the course of the last few weeks. Those on the front line, most especially. I don't think many of us can really quite grasp the depths of difficulty that some members of our staff are having to face, as is the case right the way across the public sector. And our thoughts are very much with all of those, not just in the County Council, but right the way across all of the agencies and organisations that are working for both containing the virus and then recovering for the future of our country. So it's important to make those comments up front. Second, I'd like to welcome this paper. I think it is really important that we keep a track of what we've done, how we've done it, and why we've done it through this crisis. There will be people later who will want to look back at how different organisations worked, what the strengths were, what the weaknesses were, what the learning opportunities were, and the more transparent we can be with how we behave through this period, the better. In the short term, that also gives more of our community reassurance about things that are happening and why they're working in the way that they are. So all of these things are really important today, and that's why I welcome this paper. I think as we move forward, it will be important that we don't just record the impact for the County Council, but also the impact on the county. And we talk rightly in this paper about County Council services and County Council functions, but we don't then go on to talk about some of the indirect impacts. We talk about our care homes, not all care homes, and those clearly matter. One of the difficulties with these papers inevitably is they are out of date the second they're printed. And a lot has happened since John Coughlin and the team put this report together. And so I think in particular with the change from stay at home to stay alert, with the news of our schools opening in part from the beginning of June, we need to reflect on those issues. I would very much like some commentary this afternoon rather, either from Cabinet or from Chief Officers present on how that process is likely to work and some of the initial reaction that's been in place to help get our schools ready to open in whatever form they are, particularly given the concern that many teachers and many parents have about schools reopening so quickly with the lack of opportunity for preparation. But in summary, Chairman, I'd like to thank all those in party to putting this report together and put on record again our thanks and support to all the staff across the county for all the work they've done so far, and indeed all the work they'll continue to do in dealing with this crisis.
Thank you very much, Councillor House. And I'd like to reciprocate and thank you for your constructive approach to this particular crisis. And I'd also like to welcome you back after your illness, looking so fit. I should have said that at the beginning.
Thank you, Chairman. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. Thank you.
And I'd now like to turn to Councillor Porter for her comments.
Thank you. And I echo, of course, I won't lengthen the meeting by going through the detail that Keith's gone through, but I just wanted to talk about 4 very small things. Well, no, one is bigger. And I've actually just left a meeting of a preschool who are trying to work out the crisis management of dealing with a June the 1st opening to more people basis, which is a challenge in itself. So the paper is very interesting and covers a lot. And I'm also the Cabinet Member for Wellbeing at Winchester City Council. So I've been taking part in meetings with the county and public health as well on a regular basis. And I'd just like to really point out some really helpful pieces of work that's been done. One is to have the coronavirus members' queries email. I think that's been very helpful, and being able to direct things without knowing that you're filling up the mailbox of someone who might have less time to manage it. So that's been greatly appreciated. A really clear response from our link person, which has been Rob Ormrod, and I'm presuming that all the other link people have been very helpful too. His practical and humane responses have been greatly appreciated, and a great appreciation as well to Steve Crocker and his team, because they have actually taken the time to meet with me and talk with me about the changing needs of children within the crisis. So I do want to give real thanks to those. The third thing I wanted to raise was paragraph 35, and I think the paragraph makes a very simple description of a very difficult problem, which is regarding preschool and early years childcare. And on this one, I have to declare an interest. I'm a trustee, as I say, and I've just left a meeting, a crisis meeting, so that we can discuss it. We're not only dealing with the children in our own childcare setting, but dealing with children in other childcare settings too. But the furloughing system is very poor. In fact, there is no real arrangement for childcare settings, and at the moment we're risking some very well-trained staff being lost to a service because the companies that run these and charities are going bust. And even the TOPS one at the hospital said how difficult it was to try and work out how they were going to be able to afford to carry on. And I know that Steve has raised this with DFE, but they still really haven't come up with a solution. And I really do worry about the sufficiency of this service going forward for September. And even as I've been speaking here, I know we've been dealing with the collapse of another childcare setting and taking those children into our setting. So that point, I think, is something I'd really like to make, and make sure that it's taken seriously by DFE. And the part 4, which is slightly, well, it's encouraging, I suppose, the broadband quality that we have, that we all have at our different places where we live. Mine's a private broadband quality, private broadband bought from a private company, but most people don't have that luxury. And the quality of being able to attend meetings in this way, I think is something that we are going to have to be thinking about if we're going to be encouraging the public, the general public, to take part. So I'm really pleased that we've managed to achieve such a high level of good quality broadband, but it's download speeds, it's the upload speeds we're all going to need as well. And I'd just like us to be thinking about that. But primarily, thank you to all our staff who have worked tirelessly. I do appreciate that a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. And I certainly agree with your remarks about the importance of broadband and the fact that we need to constantly improve it, particularly in the more rural areas of the county. Now, can I now ask the Chief Executive to speak to this particular item?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. And I very much appreciate the comments that have just been made, and we'll make sure they're shared with staff accordingly. They will be appreciated by them in turn, I can assure you. So I'll keep my introductory comments as brief as I can in what is obviously a comprehensive paper about a very broad fast-moving and profound crisis. The paper is, as has been intimated, an attempt to capture in short order the scale of change that's been brought about to the County Council, our partners as well, and obviously the community whom we serve in the context of this, the way the pandemic has affected the country. So the paper covers a series of corporate issues and also goes through all services. I'll go through some headline points now. I won't walk you through the whole paper, that wouldn't be fair, but it's just to also identify to you that we're joined this afternoon by, I think, virtually all of the corporate management team, together with the Director of Public Health, who will be able to answer your questions on any specifics, including some of those points about schools and early years that have just been raised. And also, before I finish my opening comments, Chairman, if I may, I'll invite Stuart Jarvis to make some comments about recovery, which has already been touched upon and which is so central to the work that we'll be doing. I did want to say, by way of introduction, absolutely in line with Councillor House's comments, that this paper is dealing with not just profound and massive circumstances, but rapidly changing circumstances. It's a very rapid as well as a very long crisis. And obviously what this paper does not touch upon directly is anything to do with the announcements made by the Prime Minister last Sunday about the potential pathway towards the gradual easing of the lockdown. The paper also doesn't touch directly upon, although Graham Allen is with us this afternoon and can do so if need be, the announcements made this week about the way in which the local authority will be involved in the support to the care home sector, not just our own, but the wider care home sector. And I want to assure Cabinet that those measures that have moved forward in the last 7 days are safely in hand, but aren't directly obviously covered by the content of this paper. I'm sure colleagues can answer questions if required. The paper does talk about the state of the disease nationally, but also within the county. I do think, and I would stress, that this is one of those moments again where having public health as part of the local government system has been extraordinarily helpful to us, and I think has made a difference to public health services generally. We know that the profile of the pandemic in Hampshire is matching the national profile, in that we're seeing a gradual reduction from the peak, and that is to be welcomed, but is slow and obviously a fragile state of progress. We know that our NHS services and colleagues with whom we're working extremely closely are working now within a much more stable acute sector, having prepared that sector to be ready for the worst effects of the pandemic. And they've prepared that sector with, I would say, extraordinary support and cooperation from the local authority and our own care sector in order to clear the way in the acute system. And those care and health systems, I think, have been working tremendously well together, despite the pressures that they've been facing. Those care systems and the market are now performing well and much more stably, but it has to be acknowledged, and I think the paper does acknowledge, that there have been challenges to that as we've gone on. The situation with regard to personal protective equipment, PPE, is now much more reliable. We are getting better supplies, and we have very, very strong coordination systems in place between ourselves and the other partners, which we're leading on behalf of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight region, particularly to do with logistical management, to get the right supplies to the right places, but working as well to guidance in order that we use the supplies that we've got to best effect. Similarly, much progress has been made with testing, but there's more progress to be had, particularly to ensure that staff within the care sector get tested as frequently as the model for recovery suggests they need to be. The other advantage we have within public health, as the paper refers to, but which has moved on again rapidly since the paper was put down, is that our Director of Public Health is also the DPH for the Isle of Wight, and has therefore been central to the vital work around tracking and tracing, which is going to be so pivotal to the way in which we manage the disease and manage recovery in the future. So Simon Bryant, who's been doing such sterling work on behalf of public health within Hampshire, also is an invaluable resource to us as we think through in the future how we're going to manage our own approach to tracking and tracing. And all of those points, I think, if I may say so, members, talk to the quality, skill and commitment of our staff and managers within the care sector and across the whole of the County Council. And I'd say again, I'm very grateful for the way those points have been made by members already this afternoon. The paper talks to a range of related issues and services, and again, I won't walk through those in specific detail, but it's worth just highlighting some of the points within there. That we are working with the schools closely, and that includes making sure that vulnerable children, as well as the children of key workers, have access to education. That's a source of national concern because we do have to worry about what's happening with vulnerable children while services and systems are perhaps focused elsewhere. The good news is that more vulnerable children in Hampshire are attending full-time education than elsewhere, but it's an issue that we need to focus upon consistently because we are worried about, as Steve Crocker says, the crisis for children is yet to come when the veil is lifted upon other services and the needs of children in the community. We've worked extraordinarily well with the coroner's service, and again, it's been helpful that we oversee that coroner's service, and the report touches upon that work we've done around the excess death strategy. And thankfully, so far, the extremes of the virus have not been as difficult as we expected them to be because of the quality of planning that's gone on. And two particular areas of service which have worked right the way through the crisis in managing quite controversial issues, but very effectively in our view, but have also had to respond with great rapidity in the last few days, are in the countryside service and also the household waste and recycling centres, which are coming back in line, have come back in line with extraordinary speed following the Prime Minister's announcements on Sunday and some of the changes legislatively which have enabled better access to those services as the first step towards relinquishing the lockdown over time. Members made very proper comments about the future and about recovery. This paper goes into the recovery strategy, which is taking shape now. This will be an unusual crisis in all sorts of ways, including that we will still be responding while we are working on recovery over a period of weeks. Stuart Jarvis, on behalf of the corporate management team, is leading on recovery for us. And I just wanted, Chairman, with your permission, to invite you to say a few brief words about recovery before handing back to yourself. Stuart.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Leader. The paper sets out the very early thoughts on the approach to recovery, and this is going to be a long campaign of recovery. As John said, it's unusual in that it'll run alongside the response phase of coronavirus for some considerable time, probably. And also it'll be the pace of recovery will to a large extent be governed by the management and control of the disease in the country, and it's likely that the NHS app and the kind of real-time intelligence that might give about the level of infection and transmission of the disease will be a critical piece of information that will help to inform the way the recovery process runs or where the brakes need to be put on recovery. It's also unusual in the sense that a number of the levers that are going to most affect recovery are not within local control, although it's encouraging that there does seem to be more discussion at a national level about the need to look at particular local circumstances more as we roll forward with the sort of easing of lockdown and think more about the recovery. The paper sets out the scope of the recovery process. And again, I'd like to underline that it's very much about Hampshire, the place recovering, not just about the County Council, but the restoration of County Council services are going to be a critical part of driving and delivering that community-led recovery. There's a commitment to community engagement, which we see as vital, and all of the evidence and the academic research supports the fact that recovery works best when it's done with strong community engagement, and that's something that we'll be looking at doing. And finally, the final point I want to make, members, if I may, is that the importance of the economic recovery kind of underpins everything. And I know members are very interested and concerned about this. And I thought the figures from yesterday that I'd share with you might just help to starkly illustrate that point. The UK economy contracted by 5.8% in March. During the financial crash of 2008-9, the UK economy contracted by just over 6% over 15 months. the projections for the contraction in April are significantly more than we've just seen in March. And the Hampshire economy, we estimate, contracted by about 6% in March, so more than the national average, because of the makeup of our economy and the exposure of sectors that are overrepresented in Hampshire compared to the national picture, which are particularly vulnerable to the direct impacts of the pandemic and the lockdown. So the economic recovery is going to be an absolutely crucial aspect of our work, and we're very mindful of that, and that clearly is going to be a long and difficult struggle, but we're already starting to make some tentative steps in that direction. And I'll finish by saying about the importance of transport in helping to support economic recovery, and the way that we can try to manage the transport situation in Hampshire, given the limited capacity that public transport will have with social distancing to move large numbers of people around. We're having to think imaginatively, and I'm very pleased and proud of the speed with which we're starting to move to look at transport arrangements to better support walking and cycling, for example, in some of the main town centre areas. There'll be more of that to come, but Chairman, that's all I wish to say by way of introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, John, for your overview. Both clearly indicate the fact that this crisis is far from over. It's certainly possible that we will have local or more regional peaks going above the present level of the virus in the future, and all we've all got to do is to ensure that wherever we can, we reduce the spread. Okay, my Cabinet colleagues, has anyone got anything to add to that? Councillor Humby.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to start by thanking Stuart and all his team for the excellent work they've been doing over this situation. Right across the department, work goes on, the day job as well, but particularly like to thank the highways team and the waste team who have been particularly busy. In terms of the recovery, Stuart said, you heard us leading on, this is going to very much depend on partnership working and collaboration with our districts and borough colleagues, as well as our unitary colleagues as well. And the work that we're doing with the local enterprise partnerships and the local resilience forum is going to be key to that. So it is a big thank you to the whole team and to everybody that's been involved with that. You've heard Stuart mention that what's going to be key to recovery will be transport. And only yesterday, I can say I'm very, very pleased to say that we heard from the Department of Transport, and we've been awarded £19.766 million to Hampshire County Council for highways maintenance for the year this year and year 2021. So this is a share of a part of the National Pothole Fund, an award from the Challenge Fund, which has been brought together as one fund and exceptionally been allocated on a formula basis, so we don't have to go through and assess on an individual basis. So we're very pleased to receive that. The funds can be used for road repairs and structural maintenance, and of course particularly welcome after the winter damage that we've had on the network. So we've got to look at that, look at the details of it. We've already started planning on a forward programme, how we're going to be able to use that. So we're just very, very pleased that we've had that money. The timing is excellent from the point of view of Hampshire County Council's point of view. That's all I've got to say, Chairman, at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humby. Councillor Gradowski.
Thank you. Yes, I would just like to add my thanks to all of our staff, as I'm sure we all would wish to do. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Coughlan for his positive comments about the advantages of having public health embedded into the County Council. It is on the one hand, I don't want to single out officers, but you might expect that I might want to add specific thanks to our fairly new Director of Public Health, Simon Bryant, who has been working flat out, I know, not just for Hampshire, but in his role on the Local Resilience Forum and also on the Isle of Wight, which Mr. Coughlan mentioned. And of course, he now has, I think, added responsibility in care homes for testing and the experience he gains overseeing the test and trace on the Isle of Wight, I think will be invaluable to us. So really just some thank yous, Chairman.
Thank you, Judith. Councillor Heron.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add paying tribute to the town and parish councils, and I'm sure Councillor Joy will also mention the community groups in areas of our county that aren't town and parish, for their excellent work in supporting us working through how can the information that we have been sharing as a county council with our Association of Local Town and Parish Councils, and the excellent work that they have been doing on the ground, both in befriending, supporting those who haven't perhaps needed the level of support that we have been providing through our district and borough, working with district and borough hubs, and supporting their more vulnerable, and make a phone call to check that they're okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heron. Councillor Joy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, just a tiny bit of amplification of what Councillor Heron's actually said. The one thing that, well, there's several things that have really sort of struck me and a number of others over the last couple of months, but the extent to which the council and officers have worked together in very close and very effective partnership with our district and borough colleagues and further down. And as Councillor Heron referred to, also the voluntary sector has actually been really, really impressive and heartwarming, because it's actually sort of brought together our communities in a way which, to be perfectly honest, I don't think has really been seen in this country since World War II. And that's something which, as I say, is extremely heartwarming. But at the same time, the adaptability of some of our own staff has been quite remarkable. The chief executive touched on it in terms of, for example, the distribution, the logistics side of life, where the adaptability of staff in emergency planning working on behalf of the Local Resilience Forum have actually got a remarkable warehouse operation in partnership with our military colleagues, who themselves are experts. I mean, they, in the sense that they know exactly when you've got guns that you need an ammunition supply, and that's in effect, if you like, an analogy of exactly what's been going on with a very, very efficient logistics operation set up and being run by the county. So I particularly wanted to highlight that, but at the same time to say how impressive and how heartwarming and reassuring the community effort overall has been.
Thank you very much, Councillor Joy. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I think I'm on now. Councillor Joy has mentioned the fact that our warehouse operation has come in for praise, and that's very good. Another area in which I think praise is due is that in our business unit HC3S, which is a school meal service in effect, we have stepped in to help those schools who were not customers of HC3S but whose suppliers weren't able to continue to provide a service during the crisis. And it does show that our approach as Hampshire County Council has been to sort the problem and worry about the other aspects of it later. And I think we have done a good thing there and across Hampshire. And when the Chief Executive puts in recommendation 3 that the staff have been at times heroic, I don't think that is an exaggeration. I think it's something we should note.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reid. Let's come to the recommendations. I don't see any more hands. Could I ask the Chief Executive to switch off his camera so we get Councillor Woodward back online? Thank you. That's very kind. Are you all in agreement with the recommendations on page 25? If you are, just put your hands up. And I notice, I think everybody's got their hands up. That's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Let's move on to item 7, the COVID-19 financial impact. And first of all, Councillor House would like to comment on this particular item. Councillor House.
Yes, thank you very much again, Chairman, and another very helpful report that we've had in front of your Cabinet this afternoon. The critical paragraph has got to be paragraph 47 of the quote from the Secretary of State, which I think we should be repeating at every opportunity. Spend what you need to spend and we will reimburse you. That was a totally unambiguous statement from the Secretary of State, following on from the Chancellor's, we will do whatever it takes. And sadly, and again, the importance of publishing this report really is the critical point here, we haven't got evidence of that at the moment. Local government as a whole really does need to stand together on these issues. We are all after the same objective, which is firstly, protecting our communities and protecting our staff. Secondly, managing to maintain and enhance public services. And then thirdly, reinstating our economy across our county. And if we look at it from that perspective, it's very, very clear that the last thing we can afford is for local government to have to bail out central government through lack of funding. And that does look to be the situation at the moment. We have seen some positivity from government. My estimate across the country is that central government has put something like £4.5 billion into local government services through various grants and one-off boosts of funding. But the cost across the country of the provision of services and the loss of income to local government is somewhere between £6 and £9 billion. So there is a very, very large shortfall, and the paper here gives the first snapshot evidence of that shortfall to Hampshire County Council. So it really is important that we come together on this item, work together to ensure that government does live up to its promises to fund the effect of changes that we are having to carry the financial can for at the moment. The first thing we can do is to make sure that we do share our data with the Local Government Association. The Local Government Association has got day-to-day access to ministers, perhaps in a way that most individual councils don't do. I don't know whether Hampshire has shared all of its financial information and returns to the central government with the LGA. It would be very helpful if it did. The secondly is we must at absolutely all costs avoid fractures coming between tiers and types of councils and different geographies across our country. There are a few hints in this paper of the districts getting off well. Who knows whether they are or they're not at the moment. What's more important is that all of local government is having to carry additional costs and seeing reduced income, and therefore we must make a clear case. Let's also not forget, as Councillor Heron said a moment ago about parish councils, that parish and town councils are also sharing a burden. They have additional costs in some cases, but they also have lost income, often through lettings of village halls for things like nurseries and playgroups, and they often have very small financial balances. I noted that in the last financial settlement that came from the Chancellor asked both counties and districts to work together on helping parishes make up that shortfall. I hope that Hampshire will join in whatever efforts are being made across the county to make that happen. As we move forward, I'm sure we'll see more financial information come forward that gives us a clearer financial picture. I see this report as a first snapshot. We don't know the full detail at the moment. It's just too quick. There's too much going on. I would urge you, Chairman, to make sure that the county continues to publish as much information as possible on the financial impact as possible to aid that understanding across the county. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor House. You can be assured that that phrase that you mentioned, I repeat regularly when I'm in touch with members of the government. I think it's also worth noting that every week the county and unitary network meets online. The SE7 group of counties meet online. At the former meeting, the chairman of the LGA attends, and I have been really encouraged overall at the degree of unanimity amongst the local government community in its dealings with government. Yes, there have been occasions where the allocation of money has been questioned, but having said that, overall, I've been really encouraged, and that encourages me to believe that we're putting our case effectively to central government. But like him, I think we have to keep repeating the message about spend what you need. And he's right in the sense that this is a fast-moving case. As recently as today, as you heard from Councillor Humby, we've been allocated just under £20 million for our roads, which I think demonstrates that central government is aware of some of the issues that exist at local government. But we'll see how things go. But I actually thank him for his contribution. And now could I turn to what have I got here? Yes, sorry, could I turn to the Director of Corporate Resources to introduce this particular paper on financial matters associated with COVID-19?
Thank you, colleagues. As has been indicated, this is indeed the first snapshot of the financial consequences of COVID-19 on Hampshire County Council, as at close of play on Monday the 4th of May. And I can confirm that by close of play this evening, we will be submitting our second financial data requirement to MHCLG. This time they've taken a touch more care in giving us guidance to make sure that the figures that we are submitting are comparable, and just to confirm that all of the information that goes into MHCLG is also shared with the LGA. So that answers the question posed by Councillor House. In terms of the snapshot, the total cost of the response for the 3-month period to end of June, together with the impact on our savings programme, is 96.2 million, of which we predict 74.6 million will be met from existing budgets, government grant that we've been allocated, and savings across some of our services, leaving an unfunded balance of 21.6 million in that short term. And obviously that is going to have a significant impact on our financial sustainability going forward if government does not continue with its commitment to underwrite all of the financial consequences of the crisis. That's the costs for the 3-month period. We estimate each extra month will cost us circa 18.5 million. In terms of allocations of funding from central government, on the 19th of March, there was a 1.6 billion grant allocated, of which the allocation to Hampshire was 29.6 million. The second allocation was on the 18th of April, another 1.6 billion, with the allocations not being confirmed until the 28th of April due to changes in the distribution methodology. The first allocation was distributed on the basis of relative needs, which links partially to adult social care. The second allocation was more based on population, and in 2-tier areas there was a split of 35% to districts and 65% to county councils. Therefore, our second allocation was 24.3 million. I hope the report was clear at paragraph 22, and if it wasn't, if I can make it clear, there was no criticism at all intended as regards the amount that was allocated to districts. The report hopefully recognises that all sectors of local government require to be properly funded. What did seem strange was utilising one allocation to then almost change the distribution method at the 11th hour, rather than creating a brand new allocation looking specifically at income losses for all sectors of local government. So paragraph 24, we've identified that across all sectors, we're trying to look at categories of information, looking at the direct response costs, looking at the impact of having to underwrite across the market, looking at the increased demand directly from COVID-19, looking at losses of funding sources and income, and looking particularly at other issues, but particularly the impact that this has had on our T19 and T21 savings programmes. So you can see at paragraph 29, the cash flow impact that we assess, looking at a 6-month delay for the more complex programmes. Those will be particularly in adults and children's, but also some aspects of ETE, and then a 4-month delay across the other aspects of the County Council. And what you can see from the table is that the shift to the right, as we refer to it, would create just under a £31 million impact on our bottom line. That's an unfunded requirement, and we would need to find additional funds to support that. In terms of the allocation of the costs to the council, you can see the table at section 32 breaks down the gross costs between response, market underwriting, increased demand, funding and income, other issues, and then the impact on our savings, coming to just over 96 million. You can see the allocations of various funding streams and our savings coming to 74.5 million, leaving us with an unfunded amount of just over 21.5 million. You can see the biggest savings elements are home to school transport, particularly as a result of savings in operation during that period. So we have tried to identify wherever we are making savings in our current revenue budget to help towards the financial consequences of the crisis. Paragraph 35 indicates that if you wanted to see a further analysis of the 65.4 million, you can see that in Appendix 2, and that we are in regular dialogue with MHCLG regarding keeping them up to date with the financial consequences. Section 38 just focuses on the fact that the 21.6 million would need to be cash flowed through reserves if government don't provide urgent and timely funding to be able to meet that unfunded cost pressure. And whilst we are fortunate enough to be able to draw on some reserves, that will have a significant impact on us in the very near future, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And clearly, the longer the crisis goes on, each month will add circa 18.5 million to that unfunded cost. What is clear is the financial pressure will get worse as time moves on, and at the very outset, the corporate management team had already agreed to cease all non-essential expenditure in order to assist in this regard. There is an Appendix 3 attached to the report, which helps to highlight the impact on schools. As you're aware, the schools are separately funded through government funding passported through the local government, but it was important, we felt, to be able to give you the full information on the impact on our schools. So section 47, you can see the medium-term position. As Councillor House highlighted at the outset, I presented the quotes from relevant government ministers, which provided significant reassurance that we should be tackling the crisis and with a firm confidence that funding would be provided by central government. Unfortunately, those messages have been changing recently with reference to sharing the burden, which is a stark contrast to what has gone before and is extremely concerning. We, along with all other councils across the whole local government sector, are lobbying strongly through any channel necessary and available in order to redress the situation and bring it back to the strong commitment we had at the outset. So we'll be looking to use our existing reserves. You'll recall that we had a £45 million addition to reserves because of the pension fund contribution savings over a 3-year period. We would look to use that to help towards unfunded costs whilst we aim to secure those funding streams from government. You'll recall that we did make significant progress with the pension fund investments, which allowed us to make that £45 million gain. Clearly, the impact on the markets will have affected the pension fund, and it would not be at all surprising if in the next triennial valuation in 2 years' time, we find ourselves back to where we started, around about the 80% funded. And therefore, it is has been a positive measure that we bank those savings on a short-term basis as opposed to on a recurring basis. If we look at the table at section 51, it reminds us of the funding we have available in our budget bridging reserve and how we are utilising that reserve in order to balance our financial resilience over what is a continuous sustained period of requiring us to drive out savings. And our forecast for the next successor programme to Transformation to 21 was looking likely to have a deficit of 20.5 million. Add to that the unfunded pressure to the end of June from COVID, and we end up with a medium-term planning deficit of 42 million. Paragraph 53, just highlighting there's nothing surer than the financial stresses will continue to tighten beyond recovery as we look at the impact on adults and on children's social care as we come out of response. Paragraph 54 just reminds us that before the crisis, we were already looking at the County Council not being financially viable in the medium term without a significant additional government funding. And the current crisis has just simply accelerated that concerning position unless the government's underwriting is confirmed. Clearly, there is a lot of discussion across the sector, and you won't have missed it in the media, around the potential for Section 114 notices to be issued across the local government sector across the country. At one point, the government were claimed to be looking to suspend the requirement to issue a Section 114 notice. That seems to have moved back off the table again. At the moment, there is little sense in trying to limit expenditure at the same time as we are playing a lead role in responding to the crisis. But clearly, it is critical that we ensure that our financial pressures are being addressed and not being ignored across the sector. So for Hampshire at the moment, it is too early to be considering a Section 114 notice. We will continue to work with MHCLG through the Society of County Treasurers, SIPFA, and all other mechanisms to look to secure government funding towards the financial consequences. But clearly, if that effort fails, then all sectors of local government will be looking at when a Section 114, not if a Section 114. Colleagues, I hope that's been a helpful run through.
Thank you very much indeed, Caroline. I think that has a very thorough run through. And I'd like to ask to start off with Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Leader. That was a very full summary from the Treasurer, so I'm not going to repeat a whole load of things that she has said much better than I could. I'd just like to pick up 2 words that she used fairly often in her presentation to us, and which should give some comfort to Councillor Keith House. Carolyn spoke about financial consequences. We want to be compensated by the government for the financial consequences of the crisis that we are currently negotiating. And I think those are 2 very good words. They're the ones that we use when we are discussing the financial position. We don't want somebody to take a subjective view of what we need, or to work out whether we've done everything in accordance with a subsequently devised formula. We are reporting the financial consequences, and that's what we want the government to recognise. So I think that is very important, and I commend those 2 words to the Cabinet and indeed to the whole Council. The only other thing that I would add is, thank goodness we as a council do medium and long-term planning, because we are now able to look into the future and see what the impact is of where we are and where we're going. And Carolyn would not have been able to give us that presentation if she hadn't advised us and led us down the road of good medium and long-term financial planning. So we should be very grateful for that.
Thank you, Councillor Reid, and I totally endorse your remarks about long-term financial planning. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just to start by echoing the comments that Councillor Reid has made, that it is good always to put savings aside for a rainy day, and of course what we now have is a hurricane. So thank goodness we have always heeded that advice and always had prudent reserves. What I wanted to do though is, first of all, just agreeing obviously with the report in terms of holding the government feet to the fire, really, in terms of the commitments that were made about seeing local government all right, and now the watering down of sharing the burdens when we really don't have an ability to share a burden when we don't have an ability to raise the taxes that would be required to share that particular burden. But what I was hoping to dwell a little more upon is the prospects, and it's referred to earlier in the report, about furloughing staff and being able to take advantage of that. Now, I realise it's using taxpayers' money to subsidise another public body, but at the end of the day, our interest is Hampshire County Council primarily and the state of our finances. So I wonder whether the Treasurer could perhaps give some comment on what the impact of the government's most recent guidance is in terms of who can be furloughed. And I realise we probably don't have a great ability to dip into schools and what is happening there and perhaps what should have happened, but to look particularly at our own directly employed staff. And I wonder what sorts of numbers, what sorts of areas might that be possible, and how would that be able to mitigate some of the losses that we're likely to be experiencing? Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Woodward, we're just working through the process of furloughing at present. In the main, the local authority sector can only furlough where individuals are not grant funded. So government are stating clearly, you have your normal allocation of funding, and that should still be covering the staff that you have employed, whether that be directly employed or indeed casuals that you require to perform particular roles. In the main, our directly employed workforce are all fully employed and or have been redesignated into other functions to support the response to the crisis. Where we have casuals in the grant-funded aspect of our operations, then if there is work legitimately that they should be doing, then they're being employed. If not, then in line with normal business practice, they're not being employed. Where we are collecting the names and roles of individuals who will be furloughed within our sector, I'll come on to schools in a moment, then it is primarily in areas which are income generating. So the comparison would be that we still run a number of services on an in-house basis where other organisations have probably outsourced those. So areas such as catering, our HC3S is an ideal example whereby if we are not achieving the income from schools and from parents' contributions, then we should be looking at furloughing in that particular area. The numbers that we're talking about is upwards to around 250 staff. And as I say, we're going through the process just now of identifying those individuals, and then we will be registering them through the HMRC scheme. In schools, it's a similar circumstance. The vast proportion of school staff are covered by government grant. Again, where we can furlough is where they're covered by income. And it's slightly more complex in schools because in some areas they are running, for example, nursery and early years provision, some of which is funded by schools' direct budget and some by parental contribution. So they're having to go through a bit more of a technical process to identify the furloughing within schools. We expect our first furlough claim to go in the coming weeks. They can be backdated in any case, and individuals can be furloughed initially for a 3-week period, and then week by week thereafter, as long as they're not working. I hope that is a comprehensive response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. I don't see any other hands up to speak, so can we move directly to the recommendations, which are on page 47. Are you all in agreement with the recommendations? Put your hands up if you are. Thank you all very much. Moving on. Item 8. COVID-19 temporary changes to the County Council's duties under the CARE Act 2014. Could I start by inviting the Director of Adults and Health and Care, Graham Allen, to give us an update on this item.
Thank you, sir. This report provides an overview of the work underway across adult services and sets out the steps within the Coronavirus Act 2020 that would enable us as a local authority to move away from meeting legal duties under the CARE Act 2014, so-called CARE Act easements. The purpose of the Care Act easements is that where operational services reach a point of being unsustainable, a series of described and prescribed steps need to be followed. This report sets out those steps and seeks approval for delegated authority through myself as Director of Adult Social Services and in consultation with the executive member to enact temporary changes to Care Act duties. Some examples of Care Act easements are given in paragraph 14 of the report, and they include not assessing a person's needs, not reaching a determination around eligibility as to social care support, preparing or reviewing care and support plans, or reducing the usual range of services and reducing the choice of accommodation that may be available to people. The Care Act easements would only be used as a last resort and could not be used as a blanket approach. They could not be applied to all elements of our statutory duties. For example, Mental Health Act and Mental Capacity Act requirements would continue to need to be met, and any and all easements would need to continue to comply with human rights legislation. Circumstances which Care Act easements may be used are described in paragraphs 46 to 49. In bringing this report forward today, I've had discussions and briefings with, for example, Councillor Huckstep as Chair of HASC, and also since publication of this report with service user and carer representative groups to ensure awareness of this report and the basis for Care Act easements. Therefore, this report and its recommendation is being brought forward as a proactive measure to ensure that from an organisational, legal, constitutional and governance perspective, due diligence is being undertaken of new legislation which is available to the local authority. But at this point, I would stress we are not at this moment considering moving to a point where Care Act easements are being sought. Thank you, sir. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions from my Cabinet colleagues to the Director of Adult Services? Any other comments that Cabinet members wish to make? Well, thank you. Are you happy with the recommendations on page 68? If you switch your microphone off, Graham, then I get Councillor Woodward. That's excellent. The unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, domestic violence. Could I ask Steve Crocker, the Director of Children's Services, to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. It was thought important to bring this paper to Cabinet today, given what we know about the experience in other countries, and our colleagues in the police highlighted some research around the impact of lockdown in both China and Italy and the impact that had on domestic abuse. Now, evidently, that only became really evident after the lockdown was lifted, and that's something I'll come back to. But this is an area that the Director of Adult Services, Director of Public Health and myself work very closely on for obvious reasons. This has an impact on children, an impact on adults, and an impact on the health of the community of Hampshire. The paper outlines how we are dealing with that during the current period, and I won't add to that. Hopefully the paper is very clear. It sets out what each of our services are doing and how we're working together. It's really to note that the nature of domestic abuse, though, is that we expect the full prevalence of this issue to become more evident once the full lockdown is finished and there are more people are more engaged with their communities, children have more eyes on them from professionals, and we think that will lead to a bow wave of activity and demand, and Carolyn has previously referred to that in the finance paper. At the moment, this paper is for you to note and to invite you to bring back for a further update in 6 months, but I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Steve. Questions and comments Councillor Stallard.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Mr. Crocker for presenting this. I should just like to take a few moments. That the paper certainly sets out very extensively the kind of initiatives which the Children's Services Department in particular have been undertaking, but I should just like to thank the Children's Services and Young People Directorate for everything that they have been doing. Not least of all the Hampshire MASH, where they have been triaging a slowly increasing number of cases. As the paper sets out, we have been working very closely with the police on this issue, and this is another instance of great partnership working. I should like to reassure people who may be listening or watching this broadcast that we are doing everything possible to ensure the safeguarding of all young people in Hampshire. And I know that it has been expressed by one member of the Cabinet at least that maybe to come back with an update on these activities in 6 months' time might be rather a long and extensive period of time. But I should like to reassure Cabinet members that as the lead executive member, I am, and Councillor Chad as well, we have regular weekly updates, and we take those matters immediately to the Cabinet. We would be more than happy to come back within the period, but the document does state that we would come back within a period of 6 months. It does not state 6 months. So if we felt that there was an urgent need to come back with an up-to-date sooner than that, I'm sure we would do so. I just wanted to put members' minds at rest.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stallard. Councillor Grajewski.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would like to just draw everyone's attention to paragraph 13, because I think it's something we can't say often enough, and that is that domestic abuse, domestic violence is everybody's business. And I think now more than ever, while we're in lockdown or partial lockdown, whatever you want to call it, it is even more important that everybody realises that they do have a part to play if they suspect that there is some sort of domestic abuse going on, and that could be a younger person on an elderly person. It can even be a child on an adult, and it affects men and women and doesn't discriminate for gender or religious beliefs or sexual orientation. So it really is very important. I was glad to hear Councillor Stallard address some of the issues that I had raised about the next report being in approximately 6 months. As the report suggests, we don't know what the problems what problems we're going to find as we come out of lockdown, and therefore I'm pleased to hear that if there are significant changes, or if significant changes become apparent, that we will get to hear about them and what measures we're going to put in place to deal with them as soon as they arise, rather than waiting for 6 months. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Judith. Any other comments at all on this item? Therefore, we can proceed to the recommendations. Recommendations on page 121. Can you acknowledge your agreement in the normal way? And that's unanimous. They're all approved. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 10. This is the amendments to standing orders and executive procedures. And I want to just read out amendments to the recommendations, which you have been briefed upon prior to this meeting. Basically, the recommendations as they appear on the paper. Recommendation A stays as it is, and so does B. We delete existing recommendation C. We update the existing recommendation D and make it recommendation C. There's a new recommendation D, which I will read out to you. Requests that the Chief Executive, in consultation with the group leaders, undertakes to review the County Council's executive decision-making process, and that a further report on the outcome of the review is brought to the Cabinet after the COVID-19 crisis. Now, Councillor House asked before these recommendations were changed to speak on this item. So if Councillor House would still like to speak, if you'd like to do so now, Keith.
I'll be very brief, Chairman, and thank you very much for taking into account the concerns that I raised on the paper as originally drafted. I think we've seen actually this afternoon how successful these Teams meetings are, the ability to reach a wider audience, hopefully over time, and to give that extra transparency to County Council activity. So the paper as drafted just struck me as going slightly in the wrong direction by taking a few more decisions away from that scrutiny. I think as we go forward over the coming months, the need for even more transparency and scrutiny of public decisions becomes clear, whether that's at government level or parish council level or anything in between, really. And we can play our part as the county council in making that happen. So thanks for taking those changes on board. It would be helpful if we could get the changes up on the website as well at some point, because the website at the moment carries the printed paper, not the paper that's effectively in front of you with the recommendations. But thank you for that, Chairman, and your support particularly has been much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor House. We'll certainly get that up on the website. Thank you for letting us know that. And in addition, we are moving forward with getting our select committees up and running, and to ensure that they carry out their normal functions to actually scrutinise our legislation. And I will be involved with that quite soon in discussions with the Chief Executive and the Select Committee Chairman. Are there any comments on these changes to the to our rules? So are you all happy with the revised recommendations which I've read out at the beginning of this item? Councillor Heron. Ah, yes, here we are. Let me see. I think we're unanimous now. Thank you all very much for agreeing those changes. Moving on. And at this point, we exclude the press and the public from our meetings, as these particular items are confidential. Can I just have an indication that there are no members of the press or the public on this